And I'm like, oh, we're going to the Vanity Fair party. And he goes, are you invited? And I said, no, but we have that. And I pointed right to the Academy Award. And the guy looks at it, and he looks at David, doesn't say anything. He goes, David Seidler and Entourage coming in. He knew who he was.
All right, this is the Story Series podcast where we tell the stories behind the people. Jeff Aghassi, welcome.
I'm happy to be here. It's my pleasure.
I'm really excited to talk to you. So we should just say up front, not only are you a literary manager, but you also happen to be my manager.
That is correct. Full disclosure.
Yes. So I want to get into talking about your path, representation in general, but just as an opportunity for everyone to get to know you a little better, I like to start with origin stories. So tell me, where did you grow up?
Okay. Well, so that's your agenda. Mine is going to be a little bit more therapeutic, especially knowing that you were probably going to ask that question. And I've had that question before, and it's not an easy answer because I've sort of been all over. I had this conversation with my daughter recently, who literally grew up in one house her entire life. We moved in the middle of COVID to the second house she ever lived in, and now she's in college. And in comparison, I told her that when I was growing up, I went to at least 5 different elementary schools, moved all the time, probably moved 20 times before I was 18. Just sort of like the nature of the life I lived, the family situation. So it was a little bit more, kind of complicated, but and that's just in sort of in an informed place. That's kind of like the background was a little bit of chaos.
Sure.
And so I think that serves me now in what I do, because the business that we're both in, is a lot of just like, how do you manage a degree of the unknown and a degree of chaos and try to stay, I don't know, almost sort of like the calm in the middle of a storm sometimes. And I think that serves me now. So born on the East Coast, left there when I was, 4 years old, grew up in Southern California, down in San Diego, ended up going to college in Arizona, University of Arizona, started working in the film industry right out of school, studied film, thought I was going to go into really the news and documentary side of things.
So in university, you were studying film.
Mm-hmm.
So you had already fallen in love with film at that point?
Yeah, well, backtracking again, when I was a kid, I actually did a little bit of acting. Commercials, I had national commercials on. I was out with some friends. We were in the desert. I can't remember if we were like riding our motorcycles or what, sitting in a motorhome. And I think we were watching even the Super Bowl. It was, and there were a group of people, and one of the other kids said, "Oh yeah, Jeff has done commercials and things," and it literally came on while we were sitting there.
Wow.
Watching a football game with like rabbit ears out in the middle of the desert. Maybe it was like Havasu. I don't remember.
And how long were you acting for in your childhood?
Not that long. I did a handful of commercials. I did a play once, which was really interesting and like I didn't know what I was getting into. A friend of mine's mom did theater, and she knew I had done a little bit of acting. So, oh, come on, we're doing tryouts. And so I still talk about it. I did Thornton Wilder's Our Town.
Wow.
So I went to audition, and her son auditioned, and I got it. And then, but she was part of the production, so she showed up every day, for it. And it was, we did 5 or 6 shows a week for 6 weeks. I had no idea I was getting into that.
How old were you at the time?
I was probably 11.
Wow. Okay. So you were starting in commercials younger than that as a kid.
Right around that same time.
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
The big one that I did was, and you probably won't remember this. This probably goes a little bit before your time, but it was a big one for this Alcoa company. And the Alcoa Can't Wait. They used to do these, greatest moments in sports, football history or something. And I was in one of those. It was a big commercial shoot. So I did a little of that when I was a kid, and we used to drive up to Los Angeles for interviews, and I was playing a lot of sports at the same time, and I just got so tired of being in the car all the time that I was like, I don't want to miss practice anymore to drive to Los Angeles for,
an audition or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was probably like moments away from a totally different life.
Wow.
and the one I'm leading right now.
But did you love it at the time that you were doing it? How much of that was your drive to do it versus your family?
Well, I think it was a little bit more my mom. You know, she always wanted to be an actress and was an actress. And so she did a lot of that. And it's like, you know, oh, I have a couple of cute kids too. You know, I think it might have even, she was at an audition once for something. And this is in San Diego. So it's like, you know, a microcosm of the industry, small part of it. And like, oh, we're auditioning kid roles too. And my brother and I, they're like, hey, have them go audition for the kids' roles. And so we did. I think my brother got that one. You know, so he did a little of it also. So
it was just random.
Yeah.
Just totally random.
Kind of fell into it.
Had a knack for it.
Suddenly had an agent. You know, I probably should have made enough money to pay for college. Don't know where that went, but
that's another podcast, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So I've sort of been in the industry, and you know, sitting here with a microphone in front of us like this, you know, part of my mom had a variety of different careers too. And one of the things that she had done for a long time was a lot of voiceover work, doing, you know, like sort of like these book adaptations where they would do these teacher guides and all this different stuff and readings, and they would have actors come in and they'd literally shoot the books. This is before, like, you know, you're in the kids animation space. This is sort of like a precursor to a lot of that sort of stuff. And, you know, not like cartoons, but more on the educational side. And so I grew up in a recording studio a lot of the time. You know, we had them in the house. You know, sometimes we'd be at other, you know, professional recording studios, but, you know, so sort of like, you know, been doing this kind of thing for a long time. When I was in college, I had access to a lot of equipment and, you know, could go and shoot and do stuff that some of the other kids in college couldn't do because I'd been around it for a long time. And so I even got accused of in a huge class once of 300 students of cheating because there's no way anybody in the class would have been capable of doing what we had done. And it's like
a film, like a short film you did?
Yeah, it was actually a video production. And it was like, what? I just got accused of cheating in front of 300 people because I could do something that other people couldn't do. It was
you
just
had
crazy.
Years on them of just being around it, absorbing it.
Yeah, exactly. And I had a full, you know, I'd been editing for years, so I knew how to edit, and I knew how to cut stuff, and I knew how to shoot stuff, even, you know, before college.
Are you looking ahead towards the post-grad life? Like, what am I going to do for work?
You know, I was just blowing in the wind, really. You know, I didn't have that kind of plan. I didn't have any guidance. I really didn't. It was like, okay, I'm going to college. And I got into college, and, you know, my college experience, like my daughter just started college in January, and she's an athlete. She's a Division I level soccer player, which is amazing. I'm like, I worked 40 hours a week when I was in college. I paid for everything. And I'm like, you do not want to do it that way. I said, go work hard on the field, and, you know, you have this opportunity, take advantage of it. It's going to be a great experience. Mine was different. You know, mine was really like, I didn't develop the relationships in college, I think, because I was too busy a lot of the time doing other stuff. I'm at work till 1 o'clock in the morning.
What are you doing for work at this time?
I was working, well, it was actually, you know, it's interesting. I worked at a 5-star restaurant, and it was one of 12 in the country. So it was really high end, 5-star, 5-diamond.
And it's in what part of?
This is in Tucson.
Tucson, Arizona.
Yeah, and the restaurant's closed now. It's a restaurant called the Tack Room, and it was intense. I mean, it was crazy intense. You know, I wore a tuxedo 5 or 6 nights a week during the season. You know, trying to get 2 nights off a week was like pulling teeth. You know, it was fights and tears, and it was like precision, and it was just like, you know, it was a great proving ground, but it was so physically demanding. We worked so hard that, you know, we would literally have to, at periods of time, you'd have to back away from a table because you'd be tableside making somebody steak tartare or Caesar salad or flambeing something, and you're working so hard that you're dripping sweat literally off of your face. We'd wipe ourselves down because you got a t-shirt, a tuxedo shirt, and then a tuxedo jacket, and you can see the salt stains coming out of your tuxedo jacket because you're sweating that much.
Wow.
I mean, it was grueling. And I've always been an athlete and fit, and it's like it was a lot of work.
And are you living at home at this time, or do you have your own place?
No, I had an apartment, a little 1-bedroom that I shared with another student.
Yeah.
So I was paying for that, paying for my truck, paying for my car, or paying for, most of school. I think I left school with I think it was like $5,200 in student debt.
Wow. So it was just all grit.
It
Grit,
was
hard
just a
work.
grind.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed a lot of it. I wouldn't do it the same way. A producer who I had met recommended me. She's like, "Oh, I know this agent who's looking for an assistant." And I was like, "Okay." I had some friends that worked at agencies, and they were just maniacs. I'm like, not interested. It turns out they just happen to be maniacs. A lot of people in the agency world are also, but these ones happen to be a little bit kind of crazy. And I was like, okay, well, I'm not going to do that, but I'll take the meeting. And that's the power of taking the meeting. Take the meeting. Because you can always say no. And it was with a woman named Lynn Pleshette. And, it was different. You go into her office, she worked in right under the Hollywood sign, literally, in the Hollywood Land Realty building. She recently closed the company down. I think they're closed. I know they've closed the offices. And you walk in and it's books, shelves and shelves of books, because we did a lot of book to film deals. And art on the walls, and so sat down to meet with her, and just learn, just hearing what she did and what she was looking for and what the job would entail if I were interested in this. And so it was about 2 hours, and it's like, okay, at the end of that, it's like, all right, I'll see you in 8 days was when I was going to start. And she was like, I'm never going to be in here before 9 o'clock. I'm never going to be in here after 6 o'clock. Because she was at that point in her career where she didn't need to. And she goes, you can come in here and you can do is just make sure all these, the bases are covered, and then you can do as much more or as little as you like. And so I got to just go in there and listen to the way she negotiated. She was great at that.
She sounds pretty level-headed for someone in that position.
She's just sophisticated.
Yeah.
She came out of the publishing world, just a sophisticated adult who wasn't into the chaos of it all.
Like a good model, like a good early model for you.
It was nice to observe somebody like that. And, I learned a lot in terms of negotiating from her. There are still things that she used to say that I'm like, I still use them. Can
you say what they are?
No.
Oh, okay. Yeah. We'll save it for
yeah. If you call me and try to hire one of my clients, you might hear it.
Love that.
But I won't tell you where it came from.
Love that. Okay. So you're observing her, you're picking things up from her, also being her assistant.
Yep.
Are you starting to see kind of the path ahead in terms of how you want to grow?
Still just kind of, again, just kind of blowing with the wind. Could I do this? Yeah, I can do this. It was also one of those things where I negotiated my first book to film deal. It was probably 3 months, after 3 months of being there. And it was just the two of us. When I came in, at first she had a junior agent and her, and the junior agent, turns out, was leaving immediately. So then it was just the two of us. And, I'd listen to her. There were just files and files that you could pull from. And it's like, oh, here's what a book deal looks like. Here's, some of the bigger deals. You could go and look at them. And like, what are the deal points? What are the purchase prices? What are all the different parameters that are in one of these deals? And so, yeah, there was a time where there was something came in and she's like, oh, yeah, you handle. I'm like, so-and-so, they're interested in this. And she's like, yeah, you deal with those guys. And it's like, oh, okay. So I negotiated I still remember it, is with a couple of guys named Ron Yerxa and Albert Berger, who are great producers. They've made amazing stuff. And they were optioning a book from, I think the author was Jim McManus. And it's not that I didn't know what I was doing. I had a basic idea because I'd listened to her make some deals already. And so they're just telling me, oh, we want this book. And I'm like, okay, I knew what, I'm just writing everything down. And they're like, so they sort of present what they want. And they're like, oh, you got that? I'm like, oh no, I'm just taking it all down. And so at the end of the call, I'm like, all right, let me think it over. Let me, come up with my thoughts on this, and I'll get back to you. And then, get off the phone, because I'm like, what does this mean? And then it's like, go through, talk to her, pull deals so I could compare it to other deals. And then it's like, oh, get all these other parameters. And then I went back with my counter, so it was just a wonderful trial by fire scenario. And, fortunately I was working for somebody who, in a way, she kind of recognized that, hey, you're a capable person. You'll figure this out, and gave me the opportunity to do that. It then got a little frustrating. She brought in another, full-fledged agent who had another junior agent who had years of experience also. So then I went from being in that really interesting scenario to suddenly trying to be the support person. And I was handling a small publisher. I had, a couple of things going already. Then suddenly I'm supporting 3 other people as like the first wave, like I'm answering the phones, I'm running the copier, I'm going to the copy company when we're sending out scripts or manuscripts. Back in the day where you still actually made copies. And then suddenly I'm handling 3 other people, and it's like, ooh. And I remember I was negotiating. This is the first thing I ever had produced, and it was a big deal. It ended up becoming a movie with Richard Gere in it called The Hoax. And I was negotiating the book option for that with Paramount, with somebody at Paramount Pictures. And I'm the guy answering the phones. And there's another agent in the other room screaming at me because I haven't confirmed his lunch yet. And I'm literally making a deal that ended up being like $400,000. And I just had to mute the call, and I'm like, hey, I can't confirm your lunch right now. And that's when I'm like, I think I need to go.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you started to realize at that point that you had a knack for just negotiating, communicating over the phone. Like you didn't have that kind of fear of speaking up.
No. And it is also, it's human nature. It's hard for people to negotiate for themselves. It just is. It's hard for me to do that. And I know that. And I know, really it wasn't so much that I'm, the negotiating. I'm decent enough at that. I'm very competent at it. And I've had enough experience, especially now, that even if I don't know, a specific thing, like, oh, wow, hey, we're moving into this world, I know that there are things I don't know, And so you have to buy yourself time. You have to do the research. You have to talk to people. You have to do that kind of stuff. So I'm good at fighting for what I think is fair. And, that's getting harder and harder these days. I mean, we can get into some of that too. But fighting for what is fair, fighting for people who, it's hard to fight for yourself, especially in those scenarios where so much emotion is involved, where people really want something and they need the opportunity, but at the same time, they need to be able to pay their bills. And I think a lot of this industry takes advantage of people on an emotional level because it's a strange confluence of like people's dreams and pure commerce. And that's just ripe for manipulation. It's ripe for taking advantage of people. I've seen it. I've had it happen to me, in terms of pay, all that kind of stuff. And it's like, okay, and just not afraid to kind of roll up the sleeves and politely say, that's not going to work for us.
Mm-hmm. And when do you start to consider going out on your own?
The agent who I was working with, who brought me in, to that company, she and I were good friends. And then she ended up leaving and going onto the production side and still there now. And it was like, okay. And she and I got along great. But it was a 3-agent company with an assistant. It was a small place. And the guy whose agency it was, like, we didn't really work together that much. And, he was sort of he was sort of a bit of a lone wolf, very good at his job, very, very tough. Some people, there are producers who are like, oh yeah, I won't work with him. And but he had a spectacular list of clients. But if I wasn't out there making something happen, I wasn't making any money. I earned a very modest salary, very modest. And it's like, okay, the aspect of this that was fun was when this other agent and I would go and would work as a team. And so, but then once that was gone, it's like, okay, the writing's kind of on the walls. And, at that point, my wife and I had bought a house. We had already bought a house. And now she was pregnant. So she was, we were not young anymore. I was, at this point, I'm like 30, and I came into agenting late because I had already had a whole nother career. At this point, I think I was 36. And so she's pregnant. And one of the things that was sort of a telltale sign was my boss at the time was like, he was not excited about the fact that we were going to have a baby.
He wasn't.
No, he was kind of a dick about it.
Ooh.
And I had clients who were just like, I had great relationships with my clients. I feel like we have a good, you know what I mean? I like
Very much.
to get to know that's my connection to the world is with a lot of my clients. And so I was like, wow, that was a really weird, because I got this amazing response from the people who I knew and worked with on a regular basis. And then I got this super negative response. And I'm like,
from someone you work with every day, who's your senior, right?
Yeah. I'm like, this guy's just like, he's just not my people. So at that point I just said, I gotta go. And I literally started to figure out, like, what could I do? Could I rent office space and just, because if I wasn't making deals, I wasn't making money. I'm like, I can go not make money and not have to listen to you and look at you every day.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's what I did. I'm like, roll the dice. I literally built an office behind my tiny little house. And at first it was like, oh, I'm going to convert my garage. I'm going to convert my garage. This is true story. I'm going to convert my garage to an office. But like if you go in my garage, my daughter says a peek into my garage is a look inside my head, especially now, because my garage has like 12 surfboards. It's got 4 mountain bikes. It looks like a ski store in part of it.
That
There's
sounds like
camping gear
Yep.
over here. Like
Yep.
I have no shortage of hobbies, and I've recently taken up metalsmithing, which is a whole new section of the garage. I liquefy metal in my garage now. So I'm like, oh, okay, I'm going to build my own office in the garage, and then I'm like, okay, but the garage sometimes has a little bit of a moisture issue when it rains really. I'm like, okay, I got to get a shed to put all the stuff from the garage into the shed so I can convert the garage. And I'm like, why don't I just convert the shed? So I literally went to the valley and went to the tough shed in the valley, and I'm looking at all these tough sheds, and I'm like, what can you do to these? I'm like, anything you want. I'm like, so I could put a door right here. I could make it this size. I could go 10 by 16 and have about the size of your office here. I could do that, and I could put windows over there and over here, and I could put the door here. And they're like, whatever you want. You want an overhang? You can do that. I'm like, so I just designed this tough shed, literally, and boom. Suddenly I'm like, I'm out of here. I got, so that's what I did. And then of course, writer's strike.
Ooh. So what year is this
2000,
writer's strike?
I started on my own in the year my daughter was born, which is 2007.
2007. So that famous writer's strike.
Yeah. And also, the economy kind of started to tank.
Oh yeah. That's like 08, 09.
Oh yeah. So it's like, it was a rough start. It was a rough start.
To have such uncertainty in your career when you have this little baby who's coming into the world.
It's like, there's no less risk me being in, 10 hours a day at his place versus whatever hours I want to work at my place.
You knew the hustle. You knew what to do.
He wasn't helping me. We weren't working together. He wasn't helping me. If he would share information with other people before he'd share it with me. So I'm like, okay, yeah. I mean, it was to my advantage to leave.
You start it's a management company at the time. That's what
I immediately went to management because I'd spent a lot of time very hands-on, and I'm like, okay, these agents who are making a lot of money have 70, 80 clients. They don't talk to any of them. They just, it's purely transactional.
It's like plug and play, right?
And it's like, yeah, first of all, I didn't have that. I didn't have that built in, I didn't have like 8 people getting information on staffing needs around the town that I didn't have that. So I'm like, I can't do it that way. I can't compete with that. So, to me, what is different is smaller, more hands-on. I wanted to produce. I still want to produce more. That's my main goal. Because I think I'll be good at it. I think, problem solving, people skills. I can negotiate with people. I can make a good deal and not make people hate me. I've been able to do that. There are times when things get heated. There are some companies that are just notoriously difficult. And so, sometimes the voices come up and things get a little nasty, but for the most part, it's, when you have the ability to make a good deal for a client, sometimes you have more leverage. Sometimes you have more opportunities. The other thing is it's still a matter of figuring out like what's a good equitable place to be. When you have heat and momentum, yeah, you're going to make it better. But if you're really trying to just, I had a client who liked it like, oh, let's just screw them over. And I'm like, you can't think of it that way. You can't think of it that way because they're going to think of it that way when they have their chance. And so like, you still want to kind of make that proper deal.
Now, you touched on it a little bit, but the famous question is, what's the difference between a manager or an agent? And, as a new writer, so they're asking themselves, which one do I need?
It's interesting because there's a lot of gray area. There is a lot of gray area. And I have produced, and people are like, well, hey, how do you justify, I produced a series called Sports on Fire that I did with with a Canadian client and some Canadian partners. And we initially sold it up there. And it's like, well, how do you justify that? How do you justify being a producer on that? And it's like, okay, had I only made my clients deals, I probably would have worked 1/100th of the amount of time for half the money. So I worked 100 times harder for maybe twice the money. It wasn't a huge, and I did everything. The client had come to me with, something that he wanted to take out. I'm like, okay, let me go test the waters. Took it out, started to talk to people. They're like, that subject matter is not going to fly right now. There are opportunities in this space. And I'm like, oh, so I take that information back to the client. I'm like, hey, we got to put this on the shelf right now. It's not going to fly. There's too much competition and there's not enough output for something like that. Right now, there are needs in the world of sports. And like, let's reconceive a documentary series based on sports. And this guy had done some of that already. Super smart guy. So with that information, wheels started to turn for him. So it was like initially right off the bat, from the very beginning, it's like I'm at that initiation process of like from the seed of it. And then we've massaged that idea. Like, what do we want to do? It's like, okay, well, I love sports. I come from a background of documentary. Also, that's what I was studying. Like, why don't I watch more of these documentaries? Why don't I watch more, of these ESPN documentaries? And I'm like, they're too long. I'm like, let's reinvent that a little bit. Let's not do the 2 hour. Let's not even do 1 hour. Let's do half-hour episodes of sports documentary stories. And that way, if people love the way we do it, they'll watch two. Or if we have a subject that they love and we can hook them in on that subject, like one of them was NASCAR. Okay, can we get the people who love NASCAR to watch our story on the binary code and gender? Maybe not. But if they love the way we told the NASCAR story and they know that this other version is only going to be 25 minutes long, might they start to watch it? And if they do, then we're getting an audience we would never get. And so we sort of reinvented it that way. We went with like a much more short form content, and the show is spectacularly good. Like our episode on gender we were on HBO in Canada, and then we were in negotiations for the longest time in the US, with our distributor, trying to make the show had already been made, trying to get something going down here. And it got really convoluted and it took 2 years. And then once we got to the finish line, they're like, yeah, we're not going to do that. And it ended up on Netflix. We didn't know. Netflix didn't even tell us. I'm watching every sports documentary you can find on Netflix. It never shows up on my feed.
And what year did it appear on Netflix? Where's Netflix at this time?
Oh man, I thinking back, I can't even remember. Right now you can find it. I think you can find it on Prime.
Amazon Prime.
Yeah, I think so. But then when you go to look at it, then they didn't have the artwork up with each episode. And it's like, they don't even care. The distributor didn't care. They sold this thing as a package with other things. And it was, so it's sort of that kind of stuff.
Just dumped on there, not pushed or marketed properly.
Yeah. So it didn't find the audience. I was thrilled when we were on Netflix because it's like, oh, at least people can watch it now. And we made some of the subjects we did were spectacular. We did, our episode on NASCAR was, Sports on Fire was, the concept was, it was the collision of sports and history or politics and history and how they collided and affected each other going forward. And people are like, okay, well, and this is all, Pete McCormick was the creator of this, really smart guy. And just such a great idea. And so we had lists of ideas. We had 25, 30, we could do all these, but we got an order for 6. So it's like, let's figure out what are the best 6 to do. And so like, okay, well, what would be the lead episode in Canada? What episode do we want to hook an audience in with in Canada? And how is that different than how do we hook the American audience in? So in Canada, we hooked the audience with a version that was called the Summit Series. And this is when Canada played Russia in an 8-game series in the 70s. I think it was the 70s. And it was, so it's like, Russia was like scary, and they played a different style of hockey. Canada was all pros. They were supposed to smash them. Didn't work out that way. So it got really heated, really political. Then the people kind of turned on the team, and it was this amazing story. I wasn't really aware of it, but all the Canadians were. So like, that's the episode we'll lead in Canada. In the U.S., we want to lead with NASCAR. Well, what's the history and sport colliding in NASCAR? Well, the title of the episode was called Born on the Bottle. And what a lot of people do know, but most people don't know, is that NASCAR was really funded and formulated out of bootlegging. It was prohibition led to the creation of NASCAR because all of these bootleggers, these are the guys who were, making their cars super fast. They were doing everything they could to modify their cars to outrun the police. And they were also these amazing drivers. They were the best, they would be going full speed down these country dirt roads.
The real life getaway drivers.
Absolutely. So that's how, and then what would happen is, on the weekends, they would race. They would make these tracks and they would race each other. And then it just started to self-perpetuate. And like, you watch that episode and you realize like literally NASCAR is the byproduct of bootlegging and moonshining and prohibition.
And that's like 20s, 30s, right?
Yeah.
1920s, 1930s, the prohibition era.
But that's when the seeds were planted. Yes. So that's the start of it. And it evolved from there. And it obviously took off and it's still, and so it's always been sort of a rebel sport. And that's sort of their background in it.
And very, very American.
And very American. So we're like, let's lead in America with that story. And then it's like, okay, well, NASCAR, this could be really tricky. So I want to be involved with with breaking the ice with NASCAR, because if they shut us out, we're in trouble. Like, they have to protect their brand. They're sponsor driven. We have to be on side with this. This could be a little bit of a hot button. We might get a lot of resistance. They could not have been more wonderful.
They're like, go for it.
Well, they were very generous. And Pete was on the phone with them and he sort of pitched his version of it. And they knew we were going to do this short form take. They provided, we bought footage from them. But we shot Pete and put a crew together, shot a bunch of stuff in the South, went to the museums, all that stuff. But we had access to like new racers, older footage, newer footage, all of that. And when we put the show together, the guys from NASCAR, they were like, nobody has captured the spirit and the history of NASCAR like you guys have. And you did it in 25 minutes. And it's so good. We did steroids, we did drugs and sports, as one of our episodes, which was amazing.
Gosh, this sounds this sounds timeless.
It is. It still is. Gender.
Wow. Yes.
We dealt with gender. This was 8 years ago. Our episode on gender and gender testing and the binary system and all of that, like we're still fighting that battle right now today.
Wow.
Where the politics of the day doesn't want to talk about what's going on. They want you to look at the fact that, some guy wants to fight against girls in boxing. And it's like, well, if you're paying attention, you know that the binary system of male-female has been proven false. There's a lot more gray area. It's like, well, by the way, like you can be female up to a certain point, but you can be male. You can be super you can be like some just genetic freak of a male and everything's fine. But if you have that level of genetic difference as a female, they cap you at a certain point. And then there are people who aren't born strictly XXXY. You know what I mean? It's
True.
Like it's proven. So it's really an interesting kind of place. Drugs and sports, people want, steroids saved baseball.
Definitely.
Steroids saved baseball. Baseball was tanking when all, Barry Bonds and all of these guys came in and started, juicing up, like everybody in baseball was on something for a while. I mean, not everybody, but a lot of them. Like it was crazy, and it saved the sport. And I've often said, like I like to surf. I surf all the time. I like to watch Kelly Slater surf. Kelly Slater's my age. He won his first championship on tour before some of the guys that he competes against were even born. And it's like, okay, well, if Kelly has to take something to like fix his aging hips or his bad knee, and it's like, oh, it's on a list of banned substances, but he has to do that in order to rehab, to keep doing it, I don't care.
Yeah.
I don't care.
It's so much more
I want to see him
nuanced
surf
than just a banned substance. And
yeah. What we ask of these athletes is like, we always want new records. We want better. We want faster. But then, it's got to be within this range. It's an interesting world too. We want these high level performances. We want the Tour de France. And we talk about that in our show. We talk about, what was in the NFL. We live in that gray space in that series. Anyway, that's a whole tangent though.
No, that's
just really proud of it. Super proud of that. And that was something I got to produce.
So I have to ask you this. When and how did you meet David Seidler? And for those who don't know, David Seidler was the Oscar-winning screenwriter for King's Speech.
Yeah.
Among other films too, Tucker.
He wrote Tucker. He wrote a bunch of TV projects.
Yeah.
I mean, David had a varied career, made most of his income very early on. David and his then writing partner and ex-wife, Jackie Feather, became clients when I was at my previous agency. And they came in and it was like, they sort of were like agency clients. They weren't like, oh, we're coming here for Jeff. We did work in the movie for television world. I did most of that. So they ended up kind of becoming mine. Made some deals at the time for them. They were there for probably maybe a year and a half before I left. And when I left, I didn't take them with me. And, it was probably, 2-3 months into it. And I get a call and it's Jackie and David. And they're like, listen, this just isn't working over here. So we would like to, rejoin you. And so they came to me and I'm like, okay, absolutely. And then it was tricky because actually the King's Speech a lot of that was happening right at the strike, and it was a twisty route. David and Jackie were kind of at the end of their relationship. And so they were in the process of separating, and which was tricky because they were writing partners. And I represented both of them. And there are projects that they're both of their names are on. I'm still dealing with that right now. I have projects right now, even though David's passed away. Just finished something that I deal with the Seidler Family Trust with David's daughter, who's lovely, and Jackie. It's interesting because David can be a challenging guy, and his ex-wife Jacqueline is lovely. And I'm like, I know that they did not get along, and I'm like, okay, I respect them both, I like them both, but I also really like Jackie. And it's like, so I was in a position to where I could help them navigate the emotional challenges of being former partners and being divorced and still having some business that needed to be handled on occasion. But so they came to me together at that point, but they were separating and, unraveling the partnership. And David had at the time also just been diagnosed with cancer. A lot of people don't know that. He had been diagnosed with cancer, and he's like, okay, I don't know what I have left. And so he always wanted to write the King's Speech. He always wanted to write that. And so he started to write it, and he would still give it to Jackie to look at. Hey, would you take a look at this? And she gave him some very good advice at one point because it just wasn't coming together. It wasn't working. She said, why don't you just write it as a two-hander play? Focus on just the two guys, the relationship between the two guys, the Jeffrey Rush character, Lionel Logue, the speech therapist, and David, the king, and just work on that. And so he wrote it as a play. And then there got to be a little bit of interest in the play. And there was a reading for it. It never ended up going. But at the reading, there was Tom Hooper's mom, his mother. And Tom Hooper is I think his mother is Australian. I think so. He was like a foot in both worlds.
And he was ultimately he became the director.
He became the director of the movie. Yes, and he was doing John Adams at the time, but the miniseries, the whole thing.
Great.
And so she was at the reading of the play, and she got a copy of it and sent it to him, the play, and said, "Oh, you're going to love this." And at the same time, like I think the theater producer's assistant was also Australian. This is all in London. And he's going home for the holidays, back to Australia. And he was from a good family, nice neighborhood. And Jeffrey Rush lived in the neighborhood. And she said, put this on Jeffrey's door.
I was going to say, I read a story about Jeffrey Rush getting the script for the King's Speech in a very unconventional way.
Not the script. He got the stage play.
Oh, the stage play.
It was the play.
Okay.
The script hadn't been written at this point yet.
Okay.
And so she says, put this on Jeffrey's porch. Literally put a copy of it on his front porch. And so he comes out. This is the story I'm told. He comes out drinking his morning coffee, and it's like, oh, he's used to packages, scripts being shown up and left on his porch. Here's another one. So he gets that, reads it eventually. Calls his agent and said, hey, I told you I can't do another play right now, but I love this. And if I want to be involved if they're going to turn it into a movie. And so that immediately triggered a producer optioning the play to turn it into a movie. David was in the UK, and was doing work and started to just write it for almost nothing. It was not, and here's kind of a bone of contention, not a WGA deal. The Writers Guild was on strike at the time too. But he was allowed to do that because he was in the UK. He's outside of the jurisdiction. So he writes the movie, and then he's finishing it up. He's traveling. He had come back to Los Angeles, and he was back in LA. He just finished a draft. The producers hadn't even read it. I'd read it. And I'm like, wow, okay, this has really come along, because I'd read an earlier attempt that wasn't working. And so now that he'd done the play, he had sort of figured out what the story should be. And obviously the movie is somewhat different. But at that point, Tom Hooper, whose mother had sent him the play also, calls David, because David's phone number was on the front of the stage play. Calls Seidler and says, I just read this. I think it's wonderful. I want to option the film rights. And David said, well, good news and bad news. The bad news is the film rights have already been optioned because of the interest that Jeffrey Rush had sort of triggered. But the good news is I just finished doing the adaptation. And so David calls me and he's like, I just talked to him. He's like, should I send it to the producers first? And I'm like, no, just send it to him. And so we gave Hooper the script before anybody had even seen it. And Tom was like, I'm on.
Cut to now, it comes out, it does really well. Oscar nominations are announced. He gets nominated, David Seidler, for Best Original Screenplay.
Yeah.
Oscar night, he wins.
Yeah.
Where are you and how are you feeling?
I was there. Yeah, I rode in the limousine with David and his daughter Maya to the Academy Awards. It was unbelievable. Spectacular night. It's just, his night too. So it's like, hey, how do we navigate this? Part of, I still look back. I'm like, yeah, I helped get that fancy tuxedo for him. At the time he was with UTA, and they did a great job with him. And I was like, hey, you guys gotta, like people who do this sort of thing, like, why can't we get David dressed in a fancy tuxedo? And they were like, hey, we could do that. So I made a phone call.
So you had to do, is it because he's a writer? And
yeah.
Writers are, of course, always the afterthought, right?
Absolutely. I have a good story from the Academy Award night for that too. But also, got to be there. Unbelievable. To be in that room and then get to go to the governor's ball. I was like, the people I was sitting with, the table I was at, I wasn't with David then they spread you out. They decide who's going to be where in order to keep these tables interesting. And it was like, I was sitting with Norman Jewison.
Wow. Wow.
I'm like, I can't believe I'm sitting with Norman Jewison. I literally wrote papers on some of your television when I was in college.
And also for those who don't know, his films, is it In the Heat of the Night? Did he do that?
Well, Moonstruck is the big,
Moonstruck, yeah.
but yeah, he had a
classic Hollywood director.
lots of great stuff. But so amazing night. And he's like, well, could you figure out how to get us into the Vanity Fair party? And I'm like, absolutely not. I said, I can get us into the Vanity Fair party, but you just have to like bring the statue with you. I said, if you have the statue, I'll get us in. And he's like, okay. and I didn't know that I could actually do that, but I was going to try. I'm like, like I said, when you have a little bit of leverage.
That's the night to do it.
And so we were at the Chateau Marmont afterwards and with everybody from the King's Speech. And David's like, hey, let's try to go over to the Vanity Fair party. I'm like, okay, let's just walk because traffic on Sunset Boulevard was nuts. So it's like me, David, his daughter, and like 4 other people like walking down Sunset Boulevard with an Academy Award, heading over to the hotel to where the Vanity Fair party's at. And we're across the street. And we get there, and there's this giant sheriff. He's like, oh, whoa, hold it. Where do you think you're going? And I'm like, oh, we're going to the Vanity Fair party. And he goes, are you invited? And I said, no, but we have that. And I pointed right to the Academy Award. And the guy looks at it, and he looks at David, doesn't say anything. He goes, David Seidler and Entourage coming in. He knew who he was. Like, I was stunned. This is the cop. Like, so these guys who work the Hollywood stuff, they're like, they know what they're doing. And like, we just got ushered in, and then we get in and there's the whole press line, and David does, because we don't have a publicist with us. So I'm kind of like, playing publicist a little bit. And then the BBC was like, can we have David? We're going live because it's going to be morning in the UK in half an hour. And I'm like, David, you want to? So he stayed there and hung out. And I went into the party because I'm like, this is insane. And you want to talk about crazy party. Like, I'm standing there, I'm getting a drink, and I'm like talking to Anne Hathaway, who had just hosted the award show.
Let me just like put this in a timeline. You, years earlier, you leave your company, you build a shed in your backyard.
Yeah.
You start your own management company. How many years later are you at the Oscars, winning the Oscar with your client?
That's probably 4 years.
4, that's it.
Yeah, but again, it's just like
it's totally random,
it's
right?
luck and timing. It's at the moment. But the other thing is, like, you're in those moments and you're like, okay, just remember that this is one of those moments. Like,
yeah,
this is like, how are you going to replicate this?
Yeah.
Maybe it'll happen again. Some people, like I know some, like one of the agents I was there with, he's part of that world, and he just turns in those circles, and he's part of that all the time. I see him. I'll watch shows on TV, and I'm like, oh, there's Jeremy.
Yeah.
Which is funny, and he's I like him. He was I like working with him. He's a good guy.
He's part of that world, but you went out on your own. You built your own friggin' office, and you plugged away, and that's a really cool
it was a big moment. It really was. It's one of those ones you don't forget. But there are a lot of little moments that you're like, oh man, like first real jobs, major breaks. When you came to me, you had your first, you had just had your first staff job. Really, and then an opportunity came, and we were able to massage that and work that. And, that's a testament to you, not to me. I just happened to be at that moment, and I was able to, provide you with some guidance and some strategy. And that's really how I see myself. It's like, I help people with strategy, but any writer who thinks like an agent or manager is going to come in and make it happen, that's the wrong way to look at it. Like and people say, well, what do you like in a client? I'm like, well, I like skill. They need to be skilled writers. They need to be engaging people. Like the degree to which like an engaging person is so important, especially in television. But they also need to be entrepreneurial.
How so?
Well, look at you. You just started your own podcast. You know what I mean? Like this is a unique, interesting kind of thing. But they also have to be, if somebody's like, oh, just sitting back waiting for jobs, like, no, you need to be turning the soil. You need to know the shows. You need to be coming up with new material. You need to be out there socializing. You work in the right now primarily in the kids world, and I will say in my experience, feature films, independent space, documentaries, all of that, like the kids world that you are in, where you work, is one of the more nurturing and cohesive and kind places in our industry. You guys treat each other well, even right now when the kids world is in a tough place. Like the kids market has changed dramatically in the last 2 years. Like 2 years, 3 years, 3 years ago, it was crazy. And then it's like, ooh, it started to taper off. And I think they had overbuilt, and then there was a massive overcorrection. And then we've also just had economic factors in play. The industry has gone through a lot of like upheaval and change. And, obviously a lot of that is, the whole the onset of streaming and what that did, what Netflix did to the industry, how people responded to Netflix and the changing landscape. And I have some thoughts on that too. But so it's been a rough ride. Like 23 and 24 might have been my most challenging year ever
for a lot of people. But I felt like, and what I tell people is I signed with my manager right before I really needed one, because that gave us time to get to know each other.
Yeah. So
how do you feel about that? When does a writer need representation?
It's a tough one. Some people, it's interesting. It's you never know. I mean, I've had a lot of people reach out to me. I had somebody reach out to me once, and they're like, "Oh, I just sold. I do a lot of business at places like the Hallmark Channel." And so a writer had reached out to me like, "Oh, I sold the movie to the Hallmark Channel." This is years ago, and I'm like, "Oh, okay, wow, good for you. How did you go about that? Because some people can they get lucky, or they navigate, or they're in the right place or the right time." And so like, okay, good. I'm curious to know how you did that, because I still, I still have to get in the ring to dogfight that out to try to sell too. So when somebody does it on their own, I'm impressed. And so they told me sort of the pathway, and I'm like, what did they pay? And they threw out a number, and I'm like, oh, okay. And I don't remember what it was, but let's just say, for instance, they're like, oh, 35. And I'm like, oh, non-union, first movie. I'm like, 35. I'm like, good for you. I'm like, 35,000 is a really good first movie deal at that company. I'm like, congratulations. And they're like, oh, no, 3,500. And I said, oh, that's what I would have made. And so that person had an opportunity at that moment when they had interest. That's when they should have gone and got a professional involved, because they're like, oh, I don't want to pay 10%. And it's like, oh, you just took 10%.
Right.
You know what I mean?
You could have improved it by thousands of percent.
I would have sold it for what I thought they had sold it for, or I would have certainly tried. It would have come close to that. But it was one of those things where sometimes people don't know what they don't know.
Yeah.
And that was one of those things where it's like, if you have a moment of heat and opportunity and you need something, and that has that value, like at that moment, that writer should have reached out to people and said, hey, I have interest in this script from this buyer. Will you take a look at it? They would have had, a dozen people raise their hand and say, yeah, let me see it. You know what I mean? Like it's like knowing when you have a moment of opportunity. And that's what I do. We got together. I'm like, oh, I like this guy. He's a good writer. He comes highly recommended from somebody who I trust. Rick is a great guy. He's very generous too. That's like I said, that space that you're in, you guys are all kind to each other.
People pull people up.
They help. It's wonderful to see it. And they help even right now when and my quote is, there aren't enough lifeboats. You know what I mean? The Titanic is going down, and it's like, you're all still trying to help each other. It's like, there aren't very many lifeboats, and you're all still like holding on to each other. So I love that. But yeah, no, so that's the thing. We had started, and it's like I'm like, okay, can Does he have talent? Yes. Is he engaging? Yes. Is he entrepreneurial? Yes. Like, okay, those are three major things I look for.
Because when you see something like that, you're thinking long term. You're thinking, okay, this writer's going to, there's growth potential.
Absolutely.
And I can be there to help shepherd that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because those things are what other people look for. They want energy. They want enthusiasm in the room. It's a tough business.
You mean employers look for?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, the things that I respond to are the things that they're going to respond to. Sometimes they respond more to certain things. Like I've known people who like basically get jobs off of personality, and it's like, oh, they're not as great. They're better in person than they are on the page. And so then it's like, okay, well, that's okay. You can work with that. I can help them improve them on the page. That's something I know how to do. I read a lot, screenwriting books. Oh, by the way, I've written a lot of scripts. People don't realize that. I've written more scripts than a lot of my clients have. I haven't done it in a decade, but it's like, I've put myself through those paces. I know what it's like to try to come up with a 120-page story. And short form, but I also read all the books. I'm like, okay, I have certain ones that I go to all the time, struggling to find plot. And I've even recommended certain things. Like, hey, this is the book I go to again and again. And I'll tell clients that. I probably won't share that here.
Yeah, but you've done that to me too.
Yeah. Go get this one. Go get that one. Oh, you're working in this space. Make sure you check out this. Or in that book, look at this section here on scene structure. So I pay attention to that kind of stuff. There are a lot of other managers who do that too. But that's one of the reasons why manager versus agent, like I'm much more hands-on. When you and I talk on the phone, we're on the phone. If it's 15 minutes, it's fast.
That's quick. Well, and that's my understanding of the difference between an agent or a manager, or how I would answer that question is that a manager is like a coach. They're there in it for the long haul. And really my experience with the manager is with you, but you are those things of you get to know someone, you help strategize the next few moves. So you help your clients, you help me look at what I'm doing now. You kind of zoom in, but you also zoom out and just take a look at how that fits into the overall landscape, or what do we want to try to make this do for you, or this piece of material, or how do you want to grow? And you take the time to do that.
Well, it's strategy, and I talk it through with clients all the time. When I'm making a deal, I talk it through. Like, hey, here's where we're at. Let's look at where they're at. Can we nudge this part here? Yes. Does that help you in the long term? No. We want to win this area over here. This is more important to you in terms of the growth of your career. We do that like strategy too. I help pull clients out of a hole. The creative process, goes through waves of up and down like anything else. And sometimes, things aren't going right and the industry's not going right. And it's like right now we're dealing with a lot of that. And it's like, okay, well, what do you do? How do you keep people rational and try to stay on a target when the landscape is really tricky? And that's been a lot of what the last 18 months has been.
Every industry has rules. Some are there for a reason and some are just begging to be broken. So what's a rule in your field that you don't follow or believe in?
That's a tough one. And, the reason why that's tough for me is because I didn't come up through sort of that traditional channel where I knew what the rules were. So, if you came up through big agency kind of stuff, it's like, this is how this happens. This is how that, I don't know that. I don't know the methodology a lot of the time. I'm just like, okay, here's a situation. I got to figure it out. It's not like I feel like I'm breaking rules. If anything, I would say the rule that I break is I like my clients to have a lot of information. I get the feeling that some agents don't. They don't want to. They don't. I've got a scenario where a client is at a big agency. I share this client, and she's very entrepreneurial, and she has a career. She already has a great career. She came to me. We've known each other for years, and she recently came to me. And she was like, in a I want to do some other things. I want to work in an area that I'm not known for. But her skill set and her history in this other area those skills translate so perfectly into this other world. And a lot of Hollywood won't recognize that, or they won't take the time to go, oh, you want to do this? Well, you don't do this, you do that. And it's like, dude, look at the skills you have to do this and how they translate, and they do. So it's like, yeah, I want to try to help you do this. And she's at a big agency and she's very entrepreneurial, and she'll reach out to people who I'm like, I can't get to that person. And she's smart and she's sophisticated and she gets to them. And I'm like, hell yes. And, at one point the big agent called me and sometimes, like, oh, she wants to go after some of that big agency's own clients, wants to get to them, and they won't help. They don't help you get there. And it's like, oh, so-and-so is a client and she reached out to them and, you got to get control of her. And I'm like, really? No. Are you kidding? I'm not going to cut her wings. She's getting to people I can't get to. She's getting to people that you won't get to.
And do they just think that project is lower priority? Like, why wouldn't they connect the dots?
They want to, they're more compartmentalized. So if you work in, a certain group within some of these big agencies, you kind of play in your own sandbox, and they have different sandboxes. Sometimes there's a lot of overlay and cross, and some agents are really great about that. And it's like, oh, I have a TV person and I have a feature film person, but some of them are not like that. And some of them, some divisions don't really get to interact with other ones as readily. Oh, on the hierarchy, we're here and you're here. Your division is here.
So they're like internally competitive.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. There's a lot of that. And stay in your lane kind of shit, and keep your clients in their lane. And why is your client from here trying to get to my client over here? So you see some of that. And so I that's probably one area where, and I was just like, are you kidding? I said, I can't get to that person. She just got to that person. She's engaging with them. They're reading her material and she's got a meeting on the books. I'm like, I'm not going to say no to that. Like, another story. The King's Speech. When David told me he was going to do that, he comes to me and he's like, I'm going to write this story because I don't know how many scripts I have left, because he had cancer. And he told me what it was, and I'm like, okay, you want to write a movie about a king that people don't really know that well, certainly not in the U.S., who stuttered. I'm like, well, how am I going to sell that? But I didn't say that. I'm like, okay, make it good. Thank God I didn't talk him out of it. A lot of people might have been like, no, that we can't do that right now. I knew he was passionate about it. I knew that, like, he was at a place emotionally where that's what he needed to do. And it's like, support it.
Also, sometimes that fire in a writer is not ablaze yet. It's just a tiny flame, and it doesn't take much to go, I don't know if I can sell that. And then it just kind of goes away, right?
Yeah.
You have to kind of just nurture that and just fan it a little bit and say, yeah, if you believe, go for it.
Yeah. No, it's one of those things where it's like, you never know what's going to work. And unfortunately, I've experienced a number of those scenarios in my career to know you don't know what's going to hit. The things you think, like, oh, this will be a slam dunk. Like, don't ever say slam dunk to me. Like, don't, because there's no slam dunk. And I will say this about David. One time we had a project, and we ended up setting it up somewhere else. But we had a project where we were getting a lot of traction on. And this, I'll actually back up and tell some more of this story, because this is a good story. and I was going over, he was making me dinner. I was having dinner at his apartment. David was a wonderful host. He was just always engaging, and he would cook for you, and just wonderful. And so I think it was just the two of us. It was just the two of us. And he comes out, and he's got hors d'oeuvres and everything. Like, he was just great at it. And he pops a bottle of Cristal, like expensive champagne. And he goes, we're celebrating the games of 1940. And I'm like, I looked at him, I'm like, dude, that deal's not done yet. What are you doing? You don't celebrate until, I was like mad, and it went away. The project went away. We were able to revive it and move it and get it set up. But it was like, it's a lesson. Like, it's like, don't start your end zone dance until you're in the end zone.
Before we go, I like to end every interview with a rapid fire round. 5 questions. First thing that comes to mind.
Oh, okay.
What's the last book you read?
Right now, I'm actually reading the Joan Didion book. Was A Year of Living Magically? A Year of Magical Thinking, or whatever that. Like, I'm only halfway through it. And I'm like, so far, it's really just all about death. and dealing with that. But it's, you know, it's got those like it's going. That's what I'm reading now. I actually really struggle to read. I have a little bit more than a touch of dyslexia. And one of the reasons you talk about giving notes, one of the reasons why I'm good at giving notes is because I have to read so carefully that it just ingrains more. And I can't burn through scripts like people can. I can't read fast. I can't read late if I'm tired at all. Like I basically read out loud when I'm reading and I have to follow it, but it just permeates into my brain, I think, a little deeper because of all of the challenges that I faced to do it. But you know, I do wish I was able to just burn through material faster.
What's a movie you love rewatching?
Two immediately come to mind. One is As Good as It Gets.
Great.
You know,
Jack.
Such good character. Yes, absolutely. He's right there.
Out of frame, there's a Jack Nicholson picture above me.
Right there. That movie, I think, you know, the character work in that, you know, the intelligence of that. I remember when it came out. I remember when I got to see it screened. In fact, I went to see a screening of that. I think I was with Lynn Pleshette. I think we went together. And I think it was at the Writers Guild or Directors Guild. As a Directors Guild.
This is like 97 about?
I think so. Yeah. You got a great memory. So the other one is, and I don't watch a lot of sci-fi, but the other one is Ex Machina.
Oh yeah, from a couple of years ago, right?
It's more than that.
The Oscar Isaac.
Oscar Isaac.
I guess now it's probably 10 years ago. It feels
at least
more recent, but
it's probably
so
more,
good.
even probably a dozen years ago.
Oh yeah.
You know, I just think the character work in that is spectacular, and it's one of those ones where it's like, okay, they made the movie pretty inexpensively, but it could have been made even cheaper. I mean, it had a great high-tech, super glossy kind of look to it. You know, so I think they spent the right amount of money to make it look very authentic. Could have been done down and dirty. Could have been done, you know, even less. But it's one of those movies where I watch it a lot, and I've read the script too. And because I talk about that script, and I actually had a client once who was comparing his script to Ex Machina, and I'm like, "Ooh, you're in my wheelhouse now." And I said, well, you know, I want this to be Ex Machina, but it's not. And I said, I know that. And like he kept making the comparison, and I just had to stop him. I said, have you read it? And he said, no, but I've seen the movie. And he's like, most of that is just like, it's the actors and the directing and the performances. And I'm like, well, I've seen the movie 3 times and I've read the script twice, and I can tell you it's all on the page. I said, if you want to compare your movie to that, and I would love that, and I would love for it to be neck and neck with something like that, do yourself a favor and read it.
If it wasn't this, what's another career field you could see yourself in?
To me, it's a little bit, just that little bit. It's like, I'm here. I want to produce more. I want to produce. I think the skill sets that I have would lend themselves to that. I want to do it in you know, as I am a legit manager also. I think there's still a lot of resistance to managers being producers. And I think a lot of that is because they just leverage their way on. I want to do the job.
Worst piece of advice you've ever received?
I don't know. That one I can't. I don't know that I can answer. I don't know. I mean, I've received some plenty of bad advice, but I think it's just one of those things that like my own filter just like moves it aside.
Best piece of advice you've ever received?
That's a tough one. That's tough. And it's tough because this goes back to something that, you know, that I think one of the reasons why I bond with my clients is because I do like want to engage a lot. And, you know, I was just saying this to my wife, like I've taken up this new hobby of metalsmithing, and I'm having a great time with it. And the community in that world is really generous. And, you know, I went in and I joked with my wife that there's this guy who responds to everybody. And like I put out, hey, I'm trying to do this. And it's a Facebook group. And I told her I finally have a mentor. I'm 55 and I finally have my first mentor ever. I said it jokingly, but it's not really a joke. And I feel like that's the one thing that I've missed in my career. Lynn did it a little bit, but not enough. I needed more. And so I keep that in mind all the time when I'm working with my clients. And I try to be very generous in sharing the knowledge that I've gained through my years and experience with them so that they can have that. And so I've never really had that mentor. I mean, so I feel like that's been sort of a missing kind of piece.
It's ironic because you're a heck of a mentor to all of us.
And that's, and that's probably why I do that. That's, I want to connect, and, that's what I can, what I contribute to you is what I can contribute, and that's what I think that's also part of my value.
Jeff, where can people find you?
Send me an email, but send me a good one, because I get a lot of them, and I'll get a lot of good ones that I want to respond to, but I just don't have time. But every now and then, that right moment, that luck and timing plays, and I'm like, I'm reaching out to this person, and I do it. I've done that. I've reached out to people via, just responding to a query letter. So that's the way to go.
Jeff, this was such a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for coming out and sharing your story.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. I love seeing that you're doing this, and I look forward to seeing like all the people that you have sit in this chair.